In class, we had seen how Sumerian art reflected social norms of that culture. Both of these works, the Varka vase from your text and the votive tablet here from the Walters Art Museum, show the practice of making offerings to the gods. And we see this, of course, up here, the god receiving the offerings, and of course here as well. It's important to remember that this religious practice served a social good. This making of offerings to the deity were kept in reserve in storehouses on the top of the ziggurat and were redistributed to the needy in times of need. Another way that the Varka vase reflects the social norms of the time is that it reads from the bottom to the top. In the same way that climbing the ziggurat, whether for the goods redistributed to the poor or for the temple itself, was a key component central to Sumerian society. And just as they proceeded from bottom to top, so we've seen many of their works of art read from bottom to top as well. This work also comes from the city-state of Ur, again a Sumerian city-state, and again it reads from the bottom to the top, even though it does not show any bringing of offerings to a central deity. This came from a cemetery that was excavated in the city. The archaeologists found over 2,100 burial sites. And some of these were built from stone and had luxurious objects in them and are presumed to have been royal burial chambers amongst the 2,100 plus graves that were found. And in one of these burial chambers, one of these stone, probably royal burial chambers, everything was gone. But this object that you see on the left was found buried in the corner. Everything else had been stolen, and there remains some debate on its original use. Most think that it was a standard, military standard that was sat on top of a pole and carried in procession. I bring in this early Egyptian work where you can see the same thing. Here is the Egyptian leader, here is his entourage, and they are in fact carrying standards where you can see these decorative objects on top of poles. The standard of probably very similar to that. Many early societies had these, and in fact, when we look at early Roman Empire, we find here in this statue of the first Roman Emperor Augustus that on his breastplate we see another military standard with a decorative object, the Eagle of Rome, being returned to a representative from Rome. So this object that we see here on the left, this Mesopotamian object, is very much probably the same sort of thing. There's a hole in the bottom to be put on top of a pole. As you can see, it's really not very big. That reflects its use as this military standard. It's a wooden box inlaid with semi-precious stones, which include red limestone, bits of shell, and a field behind it, a background of lapis lazuli stone. Inside the chamber where this was found, there was also found the body of a man. He seems to have been ritually sacrificed and buried there as well, and he may have been the original standard bearer who now will accompany the leader into the afterlife. Now, there's a single narrative on this entire side, and like the Varka vase, it reads from the bottom to the top. So if we look at this, you see that we have soldiers in chariots across the bottom, carrying either spears or battle axes. And each of the four chariots, the team of horses pulling it, is trampling the enemy underfoot. So this is definitely a military victory that we're seeing illustrated here. Notice the interesting harness on the back of the horses, looking almost like a wind-up key in a toy. The idea of reining in horses through a bit in the mouth had not yet been invented in this region. It's about 1,000 years later that they began to do that. So what we're seeing is this inventive rein on the back that holds them in place. Each of these is a team of 4 horses. You can see this, actually this one's, 4 horses. There's 4 tails there. And you can see that reflected through the legs. And you'll notice our soldiers are dressed where the enemy is naked. And it's very badly damaged. It's been put back together. And what you're seeing are the pieces of stone, and then the dark areas around those are where it's been restored. If we continue to read the narrative of this scene, the next register up after this defeat of the enemy, we see soldiers marching in procession. And something we saw on the Varkavesen class is that Sumerian art has a preference for repeated figures and an avoidance, for the most part, of overlap, particularly with human figures. And so it almost looks as if it's the same figure stamped over and over again, each holding his sword, still wearing a helmet and a cape. Again, this style, this aesthetic preference probably comes from their use of cylinder seals, as we saw in class. If we continue to the right of this image, we see on the next side, we see, let's go back one here. There, the enemy being brought forward to the soldiers, being beaten up and actually stripped naked. So you can see here's a fellow standing, here's a man being kicked to the ground, and now you can see how he's covering himself up, but you can also see his genitalia there. This is this ritual humiliation of the enemy by disrobing them. And then as we continue to the top, it reads around to the right, and we see these naked prisoners being brought forward to the leader, to the king or the priest. Remember that in each of these Mesopotamian city-states, the mayor, the governor, was also the high priest to the local god. Notice here, again, we see this use of hieratic scale, where the most important figure, in this case, it is indeed the king, the priest, larger than the rest. This narrative that starts on this side of the standard continues as we move around the back side as well. It's decorated on each side. And where here we see the military victory, on the opposite side we see the spoils of victory, which is a very peaceful banquet, celebrating the peace that comes with the defeat of one's enemy. Once again, this reads bottom to top. At the bottom, we see supplies being brought for a victory dinner. So we have now horses being led forward, various supplies, both in a sort of backpack and in large bales being brought forward. And again, in the second tier, we see more of the same. Here's an ox, here's a ram being led forward, fish being brought here. Notice the scales, even this tiny figure with these little fish drawn as they're moving forward. And then at the very top, we see the leader, again larger than anyone else, enjoying a little drink with his followers. So this is certainly meant to be the aftermath of the war, which is the peace that is brought to the kingdom. And I wanted to show you one more detail, one last detail over here on the right-hand corner. You can see here is a musician and maybe an entertainer here, or a servant, behind the last of the seated elders here. And you'll notice he's playing a stringed instrument that has a body that looks very much like a bull. These objects actually exist, and here's one of them that was found at the royal burial, or we actually found 2 of these ram or bull-shaped lyres. One of them is fairly close at hand. It's just up in Philadelphia, because the University of Pennsylvania partly funded this exhibition. But there we see this detail from everyday life of the kind of musical instruments that people played at the time that were found in the burial site and are here being used to entertain our king and priest and the aftermath of the war.